And then the next layer is the temporal muscle. And the last layer is, well, it's pericranium, or you can call it periosteum. It's attached to the muscle on the deep surface. We call it periosteum to differentiate it from this layer medial to the superior temporal line that we call pericranial. So we call one approach interfascial subpericranial, and Yassergill gave us the interfascial approach. The other approach is subfascial subpericranial, and the subfascial approach, that term was coined at the Barrow, and one of the early papers on that was with Spetzler. So there are 5 layers lateral, 1 layer medial, and then we start the dissection subgaleal, and then and up in this higher part of the flap, the dissection is between the galea and the temporalis fascia laterally and the pericranium medially. And that dissection is through the loose areolar issue. But once we reach the upper margin of the fat pad, then we want to stay out of that loose areolar layer between the temporalis fascia and pericranium, not open that layer. So we go interfascial or subfascial lateral to the superior temporal line, and then subpericranial medial to the line. Here we see the 5 layers lateral to the superior temporal line and the single pericranial layer medial, and we want to stay out of the loose areolar tissue between the temporal fascia and pericranium and the galea then more superficially. Once we do the interfascial approach, I've noticed at courses that there's a tendency of trainees to want to make a cut through this layer right at the superior temporal line so you can free up the temporalis muscle. But if there's a cut through these layers at the line, then commonly the nerves are cut before they cross the pericranium to reach the frontalis muscle. So that instead of cutting vertically along the superior temporal line, we want to make a cut here, that this cut is at the level deep to the superficial layer of temporal fascia and the fat pad, and it leaves the superficial layer of temporal fascia connected to the pericranium. We don't want to separate those 2 layers. We do an incision then deep to the interfascial fat pad to connect it, and that cut or the dissection is parallel to the outer surface of the skull. But there's a tendency, once the interfascial is completed, that I've seen at courses where they want to make a cut through these layers at the superior temporal line to fold the muscle. So you want to leave the superficial layer of fascia intact with a frontal pericranium. You don't want to cut into this area, but still to turn the flap forward, you have to separate the temporal fascia and the attachment of the pericranium across the superior temporal line with a cut that's roughly parallel to the surface of the skull. So here's what it looks like. We've elevated a interfascial subpericranial flap, maintaining the continuity of the temporal fascia and the pericranium across the superior temporal line, and now we can fold the temporalis muscle in any direction that we want to. Now, this is the way we usually complete the interfascial subpericranial approach. We start lateral to the superior temporal line, elevating galea from temporal fascia. And then medially to the superior temporal line, we leave the pericranium attached to the undersurface of the galea, so we don't enter that loose areolar tissue medially in the upper part of the flap. But as we elevate the flap, then here at the upper edge of the interfascial fat pad, we go interfascial lateral to the superior temporal line and subpericranial medial, so that we don't enter the loose areolar layer with the nerves in it, the loose areolar layer located between the superficial layer of temporal fascia and the galea. And often at courses, again, I see individuals not wanting to cut down and separate the superficial fascia from the pericranium, and it's in that layer here of loose areolar tissue that the nerves are rut. So as you fold the flap forward, you want to maintain this continuity and use a cut parallel to the surface of the skull, separating the superficial layer of temporal fascia and pericranium from the superior temporal line. Unless you separate that, you can't fold the flap forward. And so you don't want to do a cut that separates superficial temporal fascia from pericranium. You want to undercut it along the line and maintain the continuity across these layers. The nerves are on the outer surface. And here's the interfascial subpericranial flap, and you can fold the muscle in any direction. Now the other approach is at the upper margin of the exposure laterally to go under the temporalis fascia, between the temporalis fascia and the temporalis muscle. We call this